the great Julia Blackwell. Welcome to the Pain and Performance podcast.
Thanks so much for having me on, Derrick. Excited to be here.
Yes, I'm excited. I feel like this is one of the most probably like misunderstood and slightly bastardized topics in terms of, we're going to be talking about fascia, everybody, and we're going to be going through all the stuff that you have heard that is true, what's not true, how's it work, how doesn't it work. I have a lot of fun stuff to dive into, but welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You said we're gonna dive right in. So you had a thing out there that basically said like fascia is the ultimate record book for everything that has happened in your life. Tell me about that a little bit.
Oh man, we are diving right into it, aren't we? Well, fascia, which is this really elaborate system of connective tissue that we have in our body, is actually one of our highest, it is the highest sensory organ that we have. It's filled with proprioceptors and also free nerve endings. So it's actually communicating and taking in information just as much as the nervous system is. In fact, fascia can communicate within itself outside of the nervous system. You know, they obviously talk to each other as well. But because of all of this information we're getting from all of these receptors within our fascia, every thought, emotion, experience, just anything that you've experienced in your life has been logged by all of these receptors and therefore passed through your fascial system. So, yeah.
So does that mean, I read that and I was like, I'm trying to get my brain to like understand that. So does that mean like even something like a stress or a trauma, does it change the fascia or is it just affecting the fascia in some way?
Yeah, good question. I guess it's doing both. So proprioceptors are constantly taking in information about both our external environment around us. So you might be familiar with how do we coordinate our movements? Where is our body in space? How are we transmitting the correct amount of force in everything we do? That's absolutely proprioception. But it's also taking a log and taking stock of what's happening in our internal environment. And so if we're experiencing a lot of stress, anxiety, if someone is, diagnosed with something like PTSD, our brain can't tell the difference between what's, a problem externally, an external threat, let's call it, or what's an internal threat. It's just processing as, ooh, something's not right, a threat has been detected. And so fascia can respond to a threat, even if it's internal, and thus it can become more rigid, it can become more dense over time. I'm sure, you've heard of the body keeps the score, but they've actually tracked fascia getting thicker and more dense over time because of this chronic tension that the body is under, thinking that it's under attack or it's waiting for some type of an impact that never actually comes. So absolutely, fascia can respond and change just based off of our internal environment.
Yeah, one of the things that I guess, like we were talking about before we started, I've probably learned this at some point, although I may not have. I went to a wonderful school that does a lot of research. I went to LSU New Orleans. I was going to not throw them under the bus, but hey, we're all friends here. I don't know how much we actually went into like fascia other than like going of what it is, but I don't know that there was any functional education with it. But so whenever I was going back through this, one of the things that kind of surprised me was how much the fascia is made of fibroblast and myofibroblasts, where it has its own contractile components in there. And this is something we've seen in the clinic for a long time, that we started saying like, if we would needle this or if we would do an active release, like the fascia changes its tension right away. So we're like, well, that's not remodeling, that's communication and like almost, nervous system, but it might be even more than the nervous system telling the fascia to relax. It's the fascia telling the fascia to relax. I thought that was very fascinating. Tell me a little bit about how that happens. And I would love to get a little bit into how the fascia communicates with the rest of the body and with itself.
Well, there's good news and bad news with that. The good news is that, a lot of research is being done nowadays. Like, it's starting to become more of a thing. But the bad news is, in some ways, the more we learn about fascia, the more mysterious it gets, the more it like slips through our fingers. So it's actually really difficult to explain thoroughly how this communication is happening so quickly in many ways. But, some of the more recent studies, there's, a lot of studies about the water that's within our fascia. It's called the extracellular matrix. It's also been called structured water or EZ water. And that water, unlike regular water, it's more of a gel. It's actually between a liquid and a solid. So you can think of it like an egg white type of, like a raw egg white type of material. It has a negative charge, and it makes our body essentially like a battery. And so water conducts electricity. Those specialized charges within that water, I think, is what is allowing so much communication to happen so quickly, because of that water element. Most of our fascia, while it's made up of elastin fibers, collagen fibers, the fibroblast things that we're talking about, it's actually mostly made up of this structured water. So the shortest answer is water conducts electricity, and I think that's why that communication is happening so quick.
Yeah, I think that was what I was wondering is when we talk about fascia being tight and everybody, like, I want to lay the groundwork for how important this topic is. So we're going to dive into like what it is. So stick with us. We're going to come to like what this means for your foam rolling and all that stuff. I promise we're going to get to that stuff, but I do think it's important that we understand what we're talking about, because most of the time we don't. So is the communication in fascia, do you think, and I know we probably don't know this, but is it more electrical than chemical, where like the fascia is releasing like cells or hormones on its own, or signaling cells, or is it mostly that the cells inside the fascia are changing the electrical activity of the rest of the cells in that fascia?
I know what you mean. I'm not fully sure as far as the research that I'm up to date on, but it's, for the longest time, up until about 50 years ago, people saw this, wrapping around all the muscles and nerves when they would go to dissect cadavers and literally throw it in the trash. They're like, what is this stuff that's in the way of me seeing the muscle, the nerve, whatever that thing is? And they're like, get it out of here. Also living fascia looks so different from like cadaver fascia, right? And so they literally just kind of was like, what's all this webbing and dry material? Let's get it out of here. And so unfortunately, we're still, researching and figuring out all kinds of things as far as how specifically it's communicating. But I do think it's much more electrical than chemical.
Yeah, you brought something to mind. I don't want to get us completely off track, but are you familiar with PEMF technology?
Oh, I'm not, no.
Pulse electromagnetic field technology. And basically what that does is it uses an electromagnetic signal to improve cell communication inside the body. And so one of the things we'll see with that when they study it is that it improves fluid mobility in the body, including blood flow. So you'll see vast amounts of blood flow improvements in people doing PEMF, and we see a lot of pain improvements when patients are doing PEMF regularly. And one of the things I wonder is if fascia is made up of so much of this like structured water, if that starts to stiffen up and this PEMF is actually going in and improving the mobility of that, the fluidity of that structured water inside the fascia, if they finish and everybody feels light, they're like, man, I move so much better. It's like for that bit of time, we improved how fluid or flexible that water was. We took it out of that stiff state. I've never quite thought of it working that way, but I think that would be an interesting area of study of how does something like PEMF improve the water function inside of fascia.
Yeah, I would love to know about that study. Extracellular fluid has a couple of different functions, right? So it is what carries nutrients to all of our cells. It's what helps carry out cellular waste. It absorbs shock. It fully hydrates everything, right? It's doing a bunch of different things. So yes, if, one of my favorite analogies for fascia that is conceptually easy to understand is it's like plastic wrap that's wrapping around every single thing. So every muscle fibril, every muscle fiber, every muscle group, every organ, nerve, blood vessel. It's, it's all contained within our fascia. That's what gives us our shape and our structure. But it's also this water irrigation system. And so if we have an area that becomes like a crumpled up piece of plastic wrap, it becomes really difficult to get that hydration and that nutrition to this area of our body or down to that cellular level. So it would be interesting to see if we're sort of forcing that water in through that area that's been really tight. That absolutely would improve the glide of our muscles and our joints. It would help hydrate everything more effectively and therefore, help mobility and pain.
Yeah. The tensional integrity of fascia is quite a fascinating concept. I'd like us to dive into that a little bit, because this, like, the idea that we used to think, or at least it was kind of on the surface, that, we had bones and then we had muscles that held those bones up, and that's how we were in this upright posture as a human being. And now it's like, as we look more and more into it, a lot of our like physical integrity is actually coming from this continuous tension relationship in the fascia, where the fascia is communicating with the muscle and communicating with the nervous system to keep this continuous tension network in a perfect situation to keep us as these upright beings. Let's talk a little bit about that concept and how that relates to movement.
Yeah. Tensegrity is a really interesting way of looking at the body. Because right. When I was in school as well, my degree is in exercise physiology, so not as in depth as I'm sure your degree was, but you just see the skeletal system hanging like you see in science class, and you're like, oh, that's our skeletal system. It's held together. That's just what it is. And then the muscles attached to the bones. But fascia is actually what's keeping everything together. One of my favorite visualizations is, if everything were to magically disappear out of your body except for fascia, you would largely still look like you. Whereas on the flip side, if only your fascia were to disappear magically out of your body, you would just go tumbling to the ground in a pile of bones and goo. So it's all of these sheets and layers on layers that are holding each other accountable, or, like holding each other balanced in certain areas to keep us upright in the posture that you're seeing when you look in the mirror. So again, if we'll stick with the plastic wrap analogy, if you start to get areas that become more rigid, it starts to adhere to itself, everything's going to start to pull out of alignment and mess with that nice balanced system of pulleys. And so now you're like, oh, weird. Now I'm kind of hunched forward and I have a forward head and my shoulders are coming forward. Or now I see that one hip is higher than the other. And we tend to think, oh, this is a structural problem. I need to go to an orthopedist, or, whatever list we go through in our minds. But it's like, well, actually, bones are going to go where muscles tell them, and muscles are going to go where fascia is going to tell them. So following that line of what's actually tense in your fascia that might be creating pain or an issue elsewhere in your body is really important to understand, but also can be tricky because, where you feel the pain is almost never the problem. So you get to go down that fun rabbit hole of like, okay, what's actually happening in there?
Yeah, I'll tell you, like, I don't know when it was, but at some point in the last few years, we started really looking at some of Tom Meyer's work and the anatomy trains, and started teaching our docs, teaching our therapists based on that concept of like, how do you find the actual problem that is causing this person's symptoms. A lot of times in medicine, we're using the symptom as the problem. You have shoulder pain, that's the problem. No, it's not. That's the symptom of something else. And that's a strange concept for people to get. Like, well, I have a rotator cuff tear. That's the problem. Unless you had a trauma event, which happens. But if that's something which is like the 90% of rotator cuff tears that occurred from something changing the position or the pressure on that rotator cuff tendon, well, even the rotator cuff tendon tear is actually a symptom of a deeper issue. And so when patients start to understand that, and you say, this is why I'm treating these other areas. And a lot of this idea has certainly grown out of studying, anatomy trains and fascia connections. And we started doing what we consider, or we call, an AI movement scan, where we have like a 3D mapping technology of someone moving. And with 3 or 4 very simple moves, we can see where your body is out of balance, is not moving correctly. And then whenever our docs treat based on that, we could almost do that without talking to somebody. We could almost do that without you telling us where your pain is or what's going on. We go in and treat where that's at and get the fascial system into better anatomical balance. And 9 times out of 10, even if you had never heard what that person's main pain issue is, they're going to be like, it's gone. I'm better.
Oh my gosh, Derrick, what is the name of this program? I've been doing this with my eyeballs like for 12 years. So I'm like, what? That sounds amazing.
Yes, we same thing. And for us, it was just like a teaching. How do we teach this? Like, do you see that? And, look, we'll have new hires and new grads that come on and they're like, I think so. You're like, okay, well, you think so, we're not quite there. How do we start to teach this on a deeper level? So, and a lot of that came, I think certainly, look, whenever a physical therapist comes out of school, they understand muscles. They can probably tell you the connections of, the origin and insertion of every muscle in the body and innervation and all that stuff. And you realize they get out and they don't know how to use that to treat. And I would say 99% of doctors are in the exact same boat of, well, this means I need to treat this one area.
Yeah, I think the danger is like we're so good at being able to understand our bodies down to the cellular level, or yeah, we know every muscle origin insertion, we know the exact function or list of functions of every specific thing, that we forget that the body doesn't work so piecemeal. It doesn't just work. When you flex your elbow, it's not just your bicep working. It's a whole system of things. It's a whole unit of things. And so being able to zoom out a little bit, especially in the context of fascia, right, is all of your fascia is connected. There are certain lines that are more connected than others, but it's all communicating. It's all affecting everywhere else in your body. It's impossible to say like, oh, I have some hip pain, but everywhere else in my body is fine. It's this whole unit. And so I get it. It takes a little bit of practice and education to be like, how do I take all of this that I know and actually just zoom out in a much wider lens and see how is everything working together?
Somebody needs to make a new song, like the little knee bone connected to the, like we need a fascia song. Somebody out there, please tag me and Julia on your song of yes, how do we start teaching kids how this is actually connected. So when we're looking at healthy fascia, trying to get healthy, it's an interesting thing because I think we talk about releasing fascia all the time, but even what we're talking about here is that there's a box that fascia needs to be in, and that's sometimes like you said earlier, if it's not tense, if we took fascia away, then our body kind of collapses there. So we need it to have some rigidity and tension. But if it's too much, well, now we're not moving correctly and we're causing error signals, and so we're going to have pain. So we don't want it too loose, but we don't want our fascia too tight. So what does, if we're looking at healthy fascia, like what does that mean to you?
That's I don't think anyone's ever asked me that. That's really interesting. I'd say fascia is meant to be in a place of hydration and balance. So, we talk about, like releasing fascia. And if you really want to get into it, it's like, well, can fascia actually be released? Can it be too loose? It's more about like the texture. So we'll throw another analogy your way. If fascia was kind of like a vacuum seal bag around things and you slowly started sucking the air out of a section, everything within that bag is going to start crinkling down and becoming just a different texture. Like maybe you've felt in your arm or a certain area when you get body work, it's really ropey or stringy. It just has a different texture to it. That's usually a sign of like, ooh, something's not right. Things should mostly be more supple, more malleable with hydration. And when everything is I don't want to call it loose. It's like when everything is in that condition, it's actually much more balanced. And there's really no way to make it too loose unless you're really overworking one area. But yeah, it's tough because it happens, right? Like age changes our fascia. Poor movement patterns that maybe we don't even realize we're doing will change fascia over time. Stress actually has a huge impact on our fascia because of all of those communication signals we're getting from those nerve endings and proprioceptors based on anxiety and stress. Injuries, muscle compensations, overuse, underuse, a lot of things can start to shift and change certain areas over time. And so, yeah, I think when it starts to get unhealthy, it starts to get, you start to feel aches and pains. You might feel heavy. You might seem like you're really injury prone, like you always pull muscles, or it always seems like something is kind of aching. That's usually a sign of like, okay, something's not hydrated, or something's, between the front of our body and the back of our body, or from the right to the left, some side is tighter than the other and is messing up that system of balances.
I can tell, like, somebody's listening to this and they're like, yes, I know that something, I feel it. Like how do we do this? When we're talking about like changing that, and you brought up like, can fascia be released? Another question I would have is, can fascia be tightened? Can we tension fascia in areas if we need to? And as I'm talking this out right now, bear with me, everybody. If we release tension in fascia and it's this continuous tension network, does that tension go somewhere else? Like, have you seen that in your practice where I release the tension in the front? Well, if the balance is continuous tension from the front of the shoulder to the back of the shoulder, and I release that tension in the front, then does that as a byproduct increase the tension in the back because it's this continuous tension relationship?
Good question. It can be both. So I've seen it in my practice two ways. Sometimes you just find the right spot, and upon, releasing it, and I still use that word, but it's like, is it rigid or is it hydrated? That's kind of that loose versus tense type of thing. Sometimes we release that front area and it's just like instant rebalance and everything is just good to go. Other times as we're working through, we might loosen a spot and I'm like, oh, that kind of shifted the hips the other way. That lifted the shoulder a little bit. And then you have to go sort of follow that pattern a little bit to see, is this one of the anatomy trains? Is this some other type of compensation that we're looking for? So it just depends on the person. If they've slowly been winding up tighter and tighter and been layering compensation on compensation over years of time, it might be a really weird unwinding process where, yeah, something else gets really tight all of a sudden, and then you release a different area and they're like, oh, sweet, that tension went away, or their hips became balanced. It's kind of a game, my job is never boring.
We're going to come back to that. Don't hold me to this. I want you to take us through what that process might look like if you were working with somebody, and like going through those different little like kind of steps. I feel like that'd be fun to navigate. We see this, and the reason it comes to mind for me is like, so we'll see a lot of baseball players and they'll lose power in their shoulder. They'll have less tension with certain movements that they can generate in those muscles. And when we release the tension in like the lat and all of the fascia that would hold that shoulder down, immediately they're able to generate more power and tension in the shoulder. And so, that's where that continuous tension network kind of makes sense to me, that I could see where when we improve the balance, the area of high tension transmits to balance an area of low tension in certain instances.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when we talk about change in fascia, this gets to kind of what you were talking about earlier. I was reading at one of the things that you said at one point was that fascia is designed to resist change from outside forces. So it may take 10 times longer to change fascia without active movement. Tell us what that means in practice in relation to all of this stuff.
Yeah, fascia has so many roles that it plays in the body, probably way more than we can get into today in just one time. But one of the things that it does is absorbs shock and impact and essentially protects us from injury. So anytime you crash your mountain bike or even just like bang your elbow accidentally against the wall or something, fascia is there. You know, we kind of touched on it, has its own contractile cells, right? It that can contract outside of, you know, independently of muscles, let's call it. And that is because we need to subconsciously be able to contract and protect ourselves from impact. Otherwise, every time we bang our elbow against the wall, we would be dislocating bones or detaching ligaments and all of these different things. And so we want to actually do our best to work with fascia instead of against it. So sometimes when we're just doing something passive, like you're having a massage therapist just dig their elbow into, I don't know, a knot in your shoulder blade, and you're gripping the table and your shoulders are a little tense. It's probably a little bit more than your nervous system is ready to handle. Your fascia will actually, it's trying so hard to be like, no, this is not what we're asking for. Or maybe it's not the right spot. You know, our body is full of so much wisdom. It knows what's going on. And so, you know, you come out of that massage session and maybe you feel really great for a day or two, but then that same issue comes back. And one of the reasons is that you probably weren't releasing the right spot, as we've touched on. But secondly is because, again, fascia was really trying to resist that outside force. And it really helps to do some active movement with a lot of things, because then your brain realizes that it's safe to access certain ranges of motion. It realizes that it actually is okay to move in a certain way. So that's what I've experienced in my own practice over the years.
Explain that a little bit in terms of like what that means for somebody listening to this. So, you know, if they're doing foam rolling, for example, you know, what's the difference, like, you know, activity wise of them, like tapping into an active version versus passive?
Yeah. So most people, foam rolling, for instance, normally you're going to lay on your quads, right? You're in a plank position, you've got your thighs on the roller, and you're using your arms a little bit to just kind of roll yourself back and forth up and down the quads. You're going to feel sensation because of those nerve endings and the proprioceptors and just having a human body. But if you actually hold on one spot of your quads and then were to bend at your knees, so your heels are coming back kind of like a hamstring curl, and you slowly do a few of those hamstring curl-like movements, and then maybe you stay with your knees bent and you rock your heels side to side a few times. Now we're cross-fibering fascial fibers in a totally new way. We're allowing that muscle to just be in a different position and get sheared across in a different way. And I find that not only does it seem to, you know, decrease pain and tension really quickly, but it also lasts so much longer when you bring in that active movement component, as opposed to just, you know, we're used to laying on tables and having something be done to us. And while, again, it can change fascia, it will change fascia over time, but being an active participant in your own healing journey is really valuable and tends to speed up the process quite a bit.
Yeah. Do you think that's from like the communication that we were talking about earlier? Like in one way, when we're doing the passive, we think that we're almost using the old model of fascia. We're mechanically trying to change it. I'm trying to like stretch out this tissue. And with the active one, you're trying to get the tissue to say like, oh, I'm just going to lengthen. Like I'm going to, you know, relax a little bit. And if you do this 2 times while I'm telling you to do that, it's done, versus the mechanical thing is like 20 times and it's almost fighting against you, and you may make the change, but maybe not.
In my experience, yeah, that seems to be what I've noticed.
I do. And I've taught patients this, and this was just like me experimenting with the multitude of injuries that I've been blessed to have. I'll get on those spots and do that kind of movement activity. And then one of the things that I started doing was just like a super deep relaxation breath, like find that spot, like, and just try and let all the tension go out of there. And it almost always, within 3 or 4 of those breaths, like the tension and the sting and the pain went away. And I thought like, well, I'm just relaxing my body. The muscles are letting go. But with our conversation already, I'm like, it's probably more that communication system is being tensed. And I'm telling somehow the fascia to communicate that, oh, it's okay, we're relaxed, so let's relieve that tension and let that go. So like that combination for me has always been incredibly powerful. I never quite knew what it was doing. It felt right. It felt good.
Oh yeah, breathing is a big component of this. It's really hard to get lasting change to happen in your body with, we were saying, without the nervous system being on board or without the fascial system's communication being on board. And so when you breathe these really deep diaphragmatic breaths, we're able to stimulate the vagus nerve. We're able to tap into the parasympathetic side of our nervous system. And it's exactly what you're saying is like, now everything in our body is like, oh, even though we're feeling sensation, everything is actually okay and safe right now. And when the body feels safe to change, you're giving it the most ideal environment to change quickly.
Yeah, that's interesting. It certainly gives a different definition to, can fascia be released?
Yeah. Yeah. It's complicated. It's not as easy as like, oh, it's tight, now it's released. It's a lot of things going on.
Let's go into how we use all this information in a pain and healing standpoint. We see things a lot, and I've been following you for a while. What's your Instagram handle? Tell everybody that it's Movement by Julia.
It's Movement by Julia. Yes.
Love it. Go follow her. She's got fantastic information. All of my followers, you will hear very similar things from a different mouth. So good. We all need reinforcement. But let's go through how this affects someone and how you work through some of that stuff. You talked about like plantar fasciitis may not be a foot problem. It's likely coming from a dysfunctional connection somewhere up the body. Let's dive into that a little bit so people can understand like how this affects what they're feeling.
Yes, that's a great example. It's funny. I feel like you're reading my mind right now. I was like, ooh, plantar fasciitis would be a really good example of this. So we have a train, an anatomy train of fascia that starts all the way in our forehead. It wraps around the back of our skull, goes down our spine to our glutes, hamstrings, calves, and then it attaches right at that heel spot where most classic plantar fasciitis pain happens. And if anywhere along that train might become, again, rigid, adhere to itself, shrink down, get dehydrated, so many different things that can happen. It can start to pull at the end of one of those connection points. So maybe that means you get really bad headaches or migraines where the top of that chain starts, or maybe you start to feel that heel pain in the bottom. And so I usually have 2 points of reference for that. So my first point is, okay, what happens if we release that posterior chain? So the calves, the hamstrings, the glutes. And at least 50% of the time, that's enough. Just releasing the fascia there completely alleviates the pulling point because it's not actually the foot, right? It's coming from further up. Now, if you have plantar fasciitis on one side only, I may also have to look and see how your hips are aligned. Because if one hip is really dropped down or you have some type of rotation in the hips, that's going to change the striking pattern on one foot or just the general wear and tear on one side. And so the second thing is I often have to find that rebalancing the hips and putting them in a more neutral position is what gets rid of the plantar fasciitis. So it can be a couple different things. Is it an alignment issue or is it tension along a fascial train? Another interesting connection I find a lot in the body is kind of this concept of opposites. So, hey, does your upper neck and your traps hurt? It's probably actually from the front side of your body that's coming from. Hey, do you have shin splints? It's actually probably coming from the calf on the back side of your body. So that's, I use a lot of different things to start to look for these patterns, but hopefully that answers your question. I just went down a tangent.
No, it certainly does. And look, we, when we teach this stuff, we teach like dry needling and things like that. A lot of times I'll tell people like, you would probably get more pain relief for your patients if you treated the opposite side of where the pain was. If they're getting it, they're getting gluten and sciatic pain, and you treated the front of the hip and you release that tension. If they're getting that knot behind the shoulder blade that everybody talks about, and you release the front of the neck and the front of the shoulder, rib cage even, you would probably 9 times out of 10 get more pain relief by working on the opposite side as opposed to honing in on exactly where the pain is at. How would somebody know? How do you know if somebody's listening to this, they're like, I've got foot pain. How do I know if it's coming from tension across that superficial back line?
I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's going to be that you have to explore your own fascia, where if you get on the roller and, again, instead of rolling on your calf, you see if there's a point that feels really tense or sensitive, sore, or something like that. And you start flexing and pointing your foot slowly. Maybe you do some big circles from the ankle each direction, and then get up and walk around and see what happened and start to play around. I think there's this concept that, or this belief, let's call it, of like, oh, my body is too complicated. I could never understand it. And in many ways, as I'm sure our conversation is maybe, showing, there are ways that, yes, the body can be very complex. It's doing a lot of different things at once, but also it's your body. If you start to work on these different areas, I think you'll find that you can learn a lot about yourself and what you need without the help of someone. Sometimes you need help. Sometimes you can start to figure it out for yourself. One of the things I do encourage people in my practice is to do stuff on their own, to start figuring out what feels good for them. I don't want them to have to need me forever.
Yeah. I mean, I think, we have to live in this body. We can't go and always have someone, guide us through that. So we have to do our tune-ups more regularly than go and see somebody. So if somebody is doing that, how do you, and we've already talked about, kind of make sure that we're doing this more actively, but would you just have them go through everything kind of in line with that injury area and say, like, look, experiment, do that daily for a couple weeks and see what you're feeling? Is the pain that you are feeling better? Well, then we know that it was that myofascial connection. If not, then, hey, you're probably healthier anyway. We've improved the health of that, those connection points, but maybe the specific pain generating tissue is somewhere else.
Yeah, with plantar fasciitis, absolutely. I would see, what does it feel like if you release the calf, the hamstring, the glute? Those are usually the top 3 in the posterior chain. And do that for a week and just see what difference is felt in your body. Maybe you feel something immediately. And if after a week or so, you're like, you know what, I'm not really feeling a difference here, then there's other things that you can also experiment with. So plantar fasciitis is probably not the best example for this, but the opposites pattern we were just talking about is like, hey, my lower back is really hurting and I've been rolling on my back, I've been stretching my back and hamstrings, and I'm not getting anywhere. Then, hey, what does it feel like if you were to release your quads or your abdomen and core fascia, which is on the opposite side, right? Or, hey, I am feeling that upper back and neck pain. What happens if I focus on the front of my neck and my chest? So that's a kind of more simpler way that you could go about, like, yeah, what if I just do the opposite area wherever I'm feeling this problem?
Is that how you teach people to do this? Like, if somebody's working with you, is there a little more nuance to like which one they start with?
When I'm working with people in person, I'm actually feeling what the texture of their fascia feels like. And so it's this very collaborative effort where we go through and do what I call a map, like a map of the lower body or the upper body, and see, where does fascia feel healthy? Where does it feel tight? What things do we release that seem to bring the hips back into balance, or what things help their pain? And then based on what we find in that session, then I'm going to give them some homework, if you will, to be like, hey, these are the areas for you that seem to be helping the most. And that may change, right? As the body unwinds, maybe we don't need to release a specific pattern. It's just like, hey, why don't you do 1 or 2 spots on all of these areas now? Or now we focus on the upper body, whatever that is. But it's a little bit more precise, I would say. in person because we have the opportunity to actually feel what's happening.
Yeah, you mentioned that. Let's come back to it. Let's talk about like maybe an example of what you're talking about. How like if somebody has lower back pain and you start with something and then that releases and changes something and you have to kind of continue following the path that the body is laying for you. Do you have a fun example of how that has worked for somebody?
So, oh my gosh, I have a bunch of examples, but like I had someone once that had back pain that was specifically on the right side of the back. And so we started with releasing the quads to see if one quad seemed to have more impact than the other. And it was like after we did the opposite quad, the back pain went to the center. And so most people are like, well, ow, I still have back pain. And I'm like, no, it changed, it moved. So now we have to be like, okay, well, where is that center pain coming from? And then I think we did an IT band on one side and that brought the hips out of alignment and moved the pain back over. So we had to do the other side. We kind of go back and forth, and then it moved higher. And that back pain went from the center of the low back to center of the upper back. And then we went to the ribs and the pecs. And then that was what actually took the pain completely away. And so it is a process of just seeing like, hey, what's helping for this specific person? And then I do as much as I can as far as like, well, I can see where this thing is misaligned or it's not quite functioning the same. So how do I release the area that I know is going to bring that back into balance? But again, it's kind of a cool process. It's very collaborative because, again, I really want people to understand that their body holds so much wisdom and it really, truly knows what's wrong, even if our conscious brain doesn't. And so I can't tell you how many times I've worked on an area and I'm having someone just kind of walk it out and integrate and have them tell me what it feels like. And they're like, well, my back pain feels better. Is that right? And I'm like, is it just because I'm distracted because we just really got into the quad or whatever that thing is? And I'm like, no. Like, trust that sensation. If something feels better after you do it, that's your body giving you this really incredible, reliable feedback.
Yeah. Don't like be afraid of it and then like force your body to be like, well, she's afraid of this new movement, so let's go back to what we were doing before where we were protecting her so much.
Yeah.
So do you think, like, if we're working through that, this is a self-serving question, to be completely honest. If we're working through that with somebody, do you think each one of those is necessary to get to the next step? So with your back pain patient, do you think you had to do the quad and then, the rib cage and then the pec and the shoulders? Or do you think those just led you to what the primary spot was? Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think in person, I'm a little bit more fluid and I'm going to see where the session leads us. And I may start somewhere without knowing the end game and wait and see what the experience is for this person and just how much progress we're making. But overall, just with understanding anatomy trains, understanding the fascial connections that we have, there are still some basic protocols that that most people fall into. If you have back pain, I'm going to recommend to anyone, like, hey, start on your quads, do your adductors, do your IT bands, see what that does. Because those tend to be the top areas in my experience. They're certainly not the only ones, but those are the top areas I find really make a huge difference really quickly. So there's two grounds. Like, there is certainly a protocol, but I've just been doing this long enough that I start to get real creative with it and see where things lead during an actual session.
I want to ask what you see when you're talking about looking at that, but you mentioned the protocols. Do you have a couple other like simple recipes that somebody could listen to, like neck pain, shoulder pain, that's like at least start with these 2 or 3 things?
Yeah, neck pain, I would say the biceps and the pecs are usually the top 2 places that I go. Again,
and would you tell people is that foam roller? Is that active release using like a mobility ball, mobility band?
I usually use a foam roller, sometimes a ball for biceps, as long as it's something that has got kind of a grippier surface. Yep. And again, you just want to be able to compress that spot and do some kind of bending and straightening from your elbow. Maybe some waving back and forth. I'm doing motions right now, and I'm like, "This is a podcast, Julia."
Yeah, so, well, they can go watch it. If y'all are watching this on YouTube, then you get it. If you're not, then you're just missing out.
It's true. But then I definitely use a smaller lacrosse ball type of thing for the pecs and get it in this little pocket here. I don't even think we've really covered this, but the way that I compress fascia when I'm working in person with people is through my foot. My clients lovingly refer to it as being stepped on, but that it's not just being stepped on. We're shearing and doing a lot of other things, but the lacrosse ball is like the perfect size of my heel, and you just stick it in that little pocket, and you do some reaching over your head movements, over the top of your head, just to start to pull and stretch all of those things apart. And the biceps and the pecs normally are the biggest culprits because most of us sit, and most of us aren't sitting in the greatest posture. And you know what? Myself included at times. But as that front part of our body begins to shorten and our shoulders begin to round forward, our traps start to become longer in an attempt to balance. And then usually what's being overstretched and being pulled apart in that tight, long position is normally where we feel pain. So if we can actually release the front part here, I found that actually helps a lot with the pain in the upper back and neck.
What about knees? Yeah. Where would people? We can do one more, and then if y'all want more information, you got to talk to Julia.
I know. It's like we could go on forever, but knees. Two biggest places if we're gonna stick to just two. The upper lateral part of your calf muscle is a big one. That area gets very congested, and releasing that, you'll feel the blood flow getting back to your whole knee. It's incredible. And then the lower part of the hamstring is kind of in that same line. Those usually help the most, but it may depend on where your knee pain is. Is it lateral? Is it medial? There are other things at play, but those would be my top two.
Yep. I love it. We show patients a ball released to like that whole kind of popliteus, lower upper calf, lower hamstring, and it really can be magical if that's that restriction in getting the knees into good extension is where the pain's coming from. Like they'll do that, and it's like they stand up right away, and I'm like, oh, you're a magician. Like, well, hey, sometimes we hit it right.
It's so funny. Yeah, I've got I have like a nickname. Everyone calls me a wizard around Denver, and it always makes me laugh because I'm like, it's just science. It's just like, it's just these connections. But it is fun to teach someone that figuring out your pain or figuring out your body in general can be more simple than it seems.
Yeah, you mentioned that. This will be a little bit different. You mentioned like it's just science, and I was listening to an interview in preparation for this, and I forget exactly where the words came from, but somebody said something about like kinesthetic medicine or spatial medicine. And I thought that was a really interesting way of describing this field, because I think for so long it's been in this like kind of like woo area where people didn't find it to be a mainstream medicine, and we're learning so much about it. Why do you think that there's been such a resistance for this to get into mainstream healthcare?
I think as far as it pertaining to fascia, I think it negates a lot of standards that we've been teaching for so many years, or that people have made a career out of. Like, trying to think of a better way to say this. We have so many standards and protocols of like, this is just the way that it is. Looking at the body mechanically, like this muscle does this function, this joint goes this way, it's a ball and socket joint, it's a hinge joint, whatever that is. It starts to conflict with some of these things that we've just thought were true for so long. And I think it's hard for people to change, to be like, hey, what if your stress is impacting you physically? Like, even that was considered woo-woo for a long time. And it's like more and more of these connections are being made of like, fascia as this this thing that overrides information that we've known thus far, or yeah, it sounds out there if you say, hey, fascia is a quantum communication system.
Right.
It sounds out there. But the more we learn, the more we realize these things are so interconnected and they're not as crazy as we think.
Yeah, I think one of the mistakes that a lot of the more ancient kind of treatments made was that as we learned more and more about function and communication and healing, was that they never updated their explanation of why they thought that worked. I think of I think of acupuncture whenever I talk about that, is like they got so indoctrinated in this is how we think it works, that even as we learned more and more about nerves and cellular response, that it just never got updated. I think in a lot of ways for the early days of chiropractic, it was very similar. And they just never updated their philosophy of what's actually happening. And you say that, and I'm like, is mainstream medicine now doing the exact same thing, where we got so behind, here's what's happening and here's how we fix it, that as we're learning more and more about how this works, that we haven't updated it to match what the current science is saying.
Yeah, and if we're talking really specific in the medical system, like going to see physicians and doctors and things, we also have a really serious problem about how much time people are allowed to spend with patients. We don't have 10 hours to really go into, problems that don't have anything to do with the doctor, but they've got to see so many people an hour. And so the easiest thing for them to do when, oh, hey, you have a shoulder problem, I could give you a cortisone shot, I could give you these pain pills, I could recommend surgery. And those are the 3 quickest things they can do, and then send you on their way. It depends on the doctor. Some of them obviously will give you some really good recommendations. But we also have, we're strapped for time, and I think people still want to give you the simplest solution, or they only have time to really look at your symptom instead of the root cause, because it might take a little bit to say, maybe it does take 30 minutes, an hour to really discover the true cause of what's happening. And we're just hurting for time, and people are like, it's too hard. It takes too much to do this the right way. So maybe we'll just keep doing it this way. Who knows?
Yeah. I think all of that is 100% true. But it does seem to be starting. I see more advanced practitioners talking about movement science, kinesthetic science, and spatial science as this is actually causing a lot of the issues that we see today. If we don't, we're gonna really get ourselves in trouble over the next decade or two, because I think our environment has changed quite a bit, and our body's trying to adapt to that in whatever way that it can.
Yeah, that's why it's so exciting to talk to people like you, because for the longest time I was spouting off about fascia, and people were like, are you sure that's even a real thing?
So on that front, how do we survive this environment? How do we get into the prevention and longevity with the current world that we live in? What's the stuff? I'm not having pain today, but how do I make sure that I keep all this stuff healthy, despite living in the world that we live in?
My best recommendation is to, get yourself a foam roller and a couple of different massage balls of, a few varying sizes, and start working on your fascia yourself. So the principles I use in my work when I'm physically working on someone in person, I've just adapted those into foam roller moves, right? The same moves that I teach people to do while I'm compressing their fascia in the office, you're doing the same thing. You're just using your roller or the ball as your tool of compression. And then you just work through your body. You don't have to do everything all at once. And, it doesn't have to take a lot of time even, but if you're simply making it a part of your routine, at least on a weekly basis, and just hitting these areas that feel a little bit tense, right? Even if you don't have pain, but maybe you get on a spot and you're like, "Ooh, man, I'm having a lot of sensation here," or this feels really intense. That's usually a sign, hey, this spot needs a little bit of love or just a little bit of work. So being able to counteract essentially what you're doing on a day-to-day basis can be really important. And if you spend a lot of time at a desk and in a sitting position, counteract that by releasing the pecs, releasing the quads, releasing things that are kind of stuck in that shortened position while you're sitting. And that's going to definitely help prevent things from sneaking up on you later.
Is that, is that daily, or are people spending some time doing some of this stuff every day if you had your way? Or is that, hey, spend 20 minutes a couple times a week and you'll probably get there?
Oh yeah. My whole game is like, how do we make this easy and actually sustainable for people? And the good news about when you move actively as you're doing a lot of this fascia release is it tends to take a lot less time. So most times I'll spend 60 seconds, maybe 90 seconds on a spot, slowly moving, and then I move to a different spot. And so I can actually get a lot of valuable and efficient releasing of fascia in 15 to 20 minutes. Sometimes I'll spend longer if I'm teaching a class, or I just feel like, hey, I'm going to spend this whole show that I'm watching on Netflix right now, I'm going to spend this whole time foam rolling instead, and just going where it feels good. But absolutely, you don't have to do it every day. Maybe if you're in a lot of pain right now, you might start on a daily basis to see how far you can get. But yeah, a couple times a week, 15, 20 minutes, you'll absolutely be well on your way to keeping everything healthy.
Yeah, I think that was how I inadvertently kind of discovered some of the principles that you're talking about, because it's like, I think there's two reasons. One, in like 5 minutes on a lunch break, my hips feel tight. I could get down, find those spots, do some active movements, do my deep breaths, and like that spot now, oh, that feels better. Okay, I'm up, I'm done. Like I made a change to it. It feels better. I'm happy. The other thing is, I have a weird thing. Look, I talk to people who need better movement all day. But it's still hard for me to have multiple times a week where on my like training schedule, it says like stretch. Like my brain is like, do we need to stretch today? Like, I don't know. But if it's mobility work, for some reason that occupies a slightly different area for a lot of people's brain. If I'm using a tool, I'm using a ball or a foam roller or some bands or something, like that feels more like workout to a lot of people. And our brain is like, yeah, of course I have to do that. At least this is what people have told me, and I have certainly told myself. So for some reason, doing that active release type of activity is a lot easier for me to stay consistent with.
Yeah,
I don't
me
know
too.
if you've seen that. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. Because it takes more, you have to engage your brain. It takes a little bit more intention and thoughtfulness to be like, oh, I'm really focused on this right now. I'm going to do it. And the time ends up usually going pretty fast. I'll start releasing a couple areas and I'm breathing and I'm just really tapped into, sensation in my body. And then I'm like, oh, that was 10, 15 minutes went by super fast. It's different than, if I was just going to lay there and stretch my hamstrings. Like I'm the worst. I can't even do yoga. It's too boring. Like the stretching type of yoga. I'm like, give me something. I played sports growing up, like through college. So I'm like, give me something more exciting.
How does this change? I hear this, I'm sure you hear this all the time in terms of, I'm just getting older. Do you think that it has anything to do with that, or is it the fascia changes that people are dealing with?
You just nailed my number one pet peeve of a statement. It is fascia. Now, I will say that as we get older, the extracellular fluid in our, the hydration that we have in our fascia starts to decrease. And so we might have to put in extra work with releasing fascia to just keep hydration getting to all areas of our body, because that fluid does naturally go down. But fascia is, in my experience, is the culprit of most aches, pains, slow recovery times, and performance issues that you're having, is because something is too restricted, it's too dehydrated, it's not allowing your muscles and your joints to move in the same way that they used to. Again, if you think about that vacuum seal bag just shrinking everything down, it usually happens slowly over time. And so, you don't necessarily feel it happening, but then one day you bend down to tie your shoe and your back goes out, right? And someone's like, I don't get it. I just tied my shoe that one time. And it's like, actually, it was probably thousands of times that things have been slowly shifting and compensating and changing. And so all we have to do is restore the health of that fascia, restore balance to areas that are very imbalanced and causing structural deviations or misalignment somewhere. And it really doesn't have to do with your age. Yeah, there's a really sad acceptance type of tone I hear with that. Of like, oh yeah, my shoulder hurts, but I'm just getting old. I'm like, don't accept that. That's absolutely a solvable problem. So yeah, hopefully anyone who's experiencing something like that out there is like, please don't settle for that. There's so many solutions out there, and you absolutely do not have to spend the rest of your life dealing with this issue. You don't get any gold stars at the end of life for pushing through the most pain, or, it's not worth it. So
you're not just getting old. You're just not doing the things that are going to keep your fascia healthy.
Yeah, there's a blog by Thomas Myers that's titled, "Are you getting old or just drying out?" It's something like that. And I was like, oh, Tom, you genius.
Is there anything else that you recommend for people on that front? Like as we're getting older, is there any, of course, like hydration and stuff, but is there any compounds, supplements, activities, advanced stuff that seems to help improve the hydration of the fascia as we age?
Number one, hands down, is movement, which I know everybody is maybe sighing sadly. Is like, none of us really move the way that we were intended, and myself included at times. So getting that movement, doing all of these, even if they're just at your chair and you're twisting side to side and you're taking your body and your joints through a range of motion, you're going for walks, you're lifting things over your head, like all of that stuff is so important to getting the hydration to all of the areas of your body, and essentially breaking up like a little fuzz that tends to form between layers of fascia. So that movement element is so, so important. I also would recommend, just on a nutritional front, that eating a lot of water-rich foods like produce, fruits, vegetables, that kind of thing, as well as actual water, is really important to keeping ourselves hydrated, especially that there's structured water in fruits and vegetables. And so eating that structured water adds to our own structured water in our fascia and tends to hydrate us a little bit more deeply, just because of all of the electrolytes and nutrient compositions of that water.
Yeah, I thought it was fascinating looking at that. You look at, we talk about like glucosamine and chondroitin for people with joint pain, but if you look at what holds hydration in the fascia, it's those gags. That is what like keeps the water content in cells. And so I'm like, when people take that and it helps, they're like, oh, it helped the cartilage inside my knee like stay hydrated. And it's like, maybe it helped the fascia around that get more hydrated, so that you can move it more and you hydrate that fascia better, and that's why your knee is better. It's an interesting little twist to what we recommend a lot of times for these certain types of pain.
Nice, that's so cool. Overlap.
It's always interesting whenever multiple people find similar answers from different categories or different backgrounds. My interest gets quite piqued, and I find fascia is very, very strongly in that camp. You look at a lot of the information that came out from people with different medical backgrounds, different movement backgrounds, different philosophical backgrounds, and a lot of them came up with very, very similar answers as to what's going on with the human body and movement medicine. And that's when you start to say, what's going on here? You have a bunch of experts that believe different things, but what they're saying is very similar. Maybe we should pay attention.
Yeah, it is cool when everyone starts to come to the same conclusions.
You talked about Thomas Meyer and Anatomy Trained. Who were some of your other big influences in this world that people could dive into a little bit to learn more about fascia and health?
I really love the research by Gerald Pollack. He's the one that discovered the easy/structured water in our fascia. He's got a lot of cool info about how light affects the water in our body, and it dives more into that concept of our fascial water being like an energizer battery. I love going down the rabbit hole with that. I've also got, I've bought probably every textbook you can find on fascia. So I have my own level of nerding out that I do, and it's come from a few different sources, but They're all pretty clinical and medical these days. So I'm doing, both of us, we're doing our best to make it a little bit more approachable to the average person.
Yeah, you're doing a fantastic job with some of that stuff. Julia, where can people, we talked about your Instagram, Movement by Julia. Where can people find you? Where can they find more about the information you're putting out there? Where can people work with you? All that fun stuff.
Yeah, certainly reach out. Feel free to reach out and say hi on Instagram. I also, my site, movementbyjulia.com is a great resource to figure out ways that I can help you, whether that's working in person or, I have a course that starts to show you how you can start to foam roll and do fascial release on your own, just at home with a few simple tools. All that information is there. So movementbyjulia.com is a great place.
Love it. Love it. We ask all our guests if somebody listening to this could do one thing today to improve their health, what would that one thing be?
Movement, my friends. Go out and do something. I know it's so simple. I'm sure it's been said a million times, but that is the simplest way to hydrate your fascia, keep everything loose, and keep yourself more happy and mobile.
I love it. Julia, thank you so much. This has been an incredible conversation. I've got lots and lots of notes. And as I expected, we covered 1/3 of my 3 pages.
Next time.
Thank you so much, Julia.
Thank you.